Welcome to Crossroads. The anti-ICE protests are the new rallying call for the midterm elections, and these are very quickly becoming the equivalent of the Black Lives Matter protests, at least in terms of organization, structure, and political use, which is the important thing. Another topic, the big scandal in American politics in recent years was that Arctic frost, the legal investigations of President Trump and those around him targeting him or going after him. And now those investigations are themselves becoming a growing scandal on many fronts, actually. I'll be going into these topics a lot more today, so make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, and let's get started. Now, first of all, a political movement aimed at influencing the midterm elections is now taking shape. Every American election has this, normally on the Democrat side, maybe with the exception of Trump and the Stop the Steal rallies in Jan 6. Otherwise, it's most of the Democrats. They tend to do mass organization, a big rallying call. They get people protesting, it turns into riots. All the media bum rushes it, all the politicians talk about it. In the past, it's been other things. It looks like for the midterms, it's the anti-ICE protests. These are the new political campaign. And the protests are now growing in size to the tens of thousands. And the Trump administration is responding by bolstering the number of federal agents and investigating, interestingly, what are the organizations behind the movement. And that's going to be a big thing because these are not necessarily grassroots. Yes, there's grassroots involvement, but there's big money, big organizations, and typically the same ones from one movement to the next. The same ones behind this are the same ones behind BLM. The same ones behind this are the same ones behind just about every other mass movement we have in the country, because these are political tools. These are political tools. Now, the Epoch Times says this: tens of thousands of people took to the streets of Minneapolis on January 10th to protest the shooting of Renee Nicole Good by an Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, officer, according to a Minneapolis Police Department estimate provided to the Epoch Times. Now, Renee Nicole Good was the woman who was in her car. Look, the video footage shows she did try running over the officer. Different angles have shown that now, without a doubt. The officer shot her, killed her. You can argue about the morality of it, but trying to hit somebody with your car is, in fact, assault with a deadly weapon. And if you assault an officer with a deadly weapon, they can use lethal force against you. But it's the same thing we saw basically with George Floyd. Renee is the new George Floyd. And is that going to work for the left? Probably not as much as BLM did, frankly. But the bigger thing is they're using this in the media to try to make a scandal. The media is desperate for a scandal because they're political actors. And they need a political issue for their political agendas. Now, like it says here, a protest organizer guessed that as many as 40,000 people attended the demonstration, thronging a large park and public thoroughfares. The Epoch Times could not confirm that estimate. Basically, one of the large-scale protests, we had our own reporters there. We couldn't really, you can't count 40,000 people. You can count maybe up to 1,000 roughly, maybe even a few thousand, but 40,000 is a tough guess. What this looks like, basically, is the equivalent of the No Kings rallies, which again were mostly about people opposing ICE. And this Nicole Good is kind of the poster person now of this movement they're trying to form. They again need a scandal, they need to say wrongdoing done, and they need to make it look like there's good guys and bad guys. And if you want to be an ally, you got to be on this side of the movement. That's typically how these things work. On that point also, it is the case in the U.S. that ahead of every single election or important election, mass rallying like this tends to be part of the get out the vote drive. Again, the Democrats have been trying to do this with No Kings. They tried doing this with, gender issues. They've done this with, of course, during the Trump administration, a lot of it was BLM, Black Lives Matter riots and so on. They need mass issues. Why is that? It's the idea of pressure and release. I mentioned this concept before. You build up pressure and then you give a release valve. In a normal free society, the release valve for pressure is elections. You can vote. And you need to get people motivated to vote. How do you get them motivated? You make them angry. You make them afraid. You get them riled up. You make them passionate. Trump's been very good at making people passionate, for example, and getting people passionate for his view of America. That's kind of the basis of the MAGA rallies. The Democrats tend to work, at least in recent years, they didn't used to be this way, but in recent years, mostly on outrage. And so it's the anti-Trump protests, it's the anti-ICE protests, it's these types of things. They need people angry about the Trump policies, and so angry that you're willing to vote against it. They need to get you voting, and to get you voting, they need to get you riled up. Communism would call this agitprop. It's called agitation propaganda. You rile up the masses, you build up pressure, and then you give a release valve. The release valve can be targeted for many things. In more totalitarian countries, the release valve could be the carrying out of a genocide. In some countries, the relief valve could be the attempted overthrow of a government. In a free society like ours, where you can vote, the release valve is your ability to vote. You need to be motivated to be wanting to create change, and you're the one who can make the change, so go and vote, and that's how it works. So they use these movements for that purpose. That's what you're watching happen right now. It's why the media is all over it. It's why it's a political issue. It's why you're going to have every talking head using the same exact talking points and bringing up the same exact names and bringing up the same exact basic issues, is because you're watching a giant script play out, which is a political agenda and a political movement. Now, in response to this, the Trump administration, though, is not backing down. On some fronts, you could actually argue this could, because on the Trump side, they're not viewing this solely as like a protest or election thing. They're also saying like, hey, we want to deport the illegal immigrants thing, especially in little Somalia right now. And so what's happening is they're bolstering the number of federal agents. They're actually increasing them. This will likely actually feed into the protests as well. So this is, politically, you could argue whether this is a good idea or not. You could argue that a lot of people under Trump did vote for mass deportations, and a lot of Trump voters want to see action, and some of the disengagement you've seen on the Trump side, ironically, is not that they're doing too little or doing too much, it's that they're doing too little. They want to see more, not less. The Epoch Times notes that Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said in an interview on January 11th that, quote, hundreds more federal officers will be sent to Minneapolis on January 11th and January 12th to carry out immigration-related operations in the city. They're deporting the Somalis, basically, right? And they're doing it pretty broadly already. It notes further in that DHS recently sent 2,000 federal immigration agents to the city, and Noem said the operation is needed to go after illegal immigrants, criminals in the Twin Cities area, amid allegations of widespread fraud involving federal entitlement benefits. What they mean here is the Somali community stealing literally billions of dollars from taxpayers and children. Now further in it says, basically going into this, right? Let me explain. The main narrative battle that we're heading into right now is going to be support or opposition to deportations. Now, that's going to be an interesting move for Democrats. Why is that? Okay, there are a couple ways to view this. One is you need outrage. You need the outrage machine because that's what gets people out to vote. The other side is you need an outrage machine that's more likely to capture new voters, middle-of-the-road voters, or disenfranchised voters of the other side. So, deportations is a bit of a risky move. Why is that? You could argue that Donald Trump, in his first term in office, what was his narrative? Well, drain the swamp and build the wall. People who voted for Trump the first time around were disenfranchised Americans, including a lot of Bernie Sanders voters, ironically, because he got kind of shafted and pushed out with the Democrats. Remember, he won the popular vote and they chose Hillary Clinton, right? He had a lot of disenfranchised voters from that. Donald Trump was promising to drain the swamp. I don't know. Is the swamp still there? I think it's fair to say it is. But also, he was talking about building the wall. And the build the wall, mass deportations, that was the rallying call. Same thing 2024. The mass deportation issue, alongside trans kids and so, which got a lot of mothers voters out. A lot of mothers came out and voted because they were worried about their kids. But the deportation issue was a big enough, big tent issue to get a lot of people voting. And polling has shown this too. Ironically, this is not as divisive as you may think. Now, the issue with deportations is it's very emotional, right? People who want it tend to be very emotional. People who do not want it are even more emotional because a lot of them are, hey, I'm a second generation immigrant. My mom is an illegal, I'm not, but I'm saying what they would say. Maybe their mother is an illegal immigrant and they're technically an anchor baby and they're watching their family members get deported. There are a lot of American citizens who are the children of illegal immigrants, a lot of them, to the extent that, white Americans are technically a minority in a lot of the country because of, mass migration policies. Democrats seem to be betting that enough people are disenfranchised by what Trump's policies have looked like in practice that they're rejecting them. Because you have heard this. There are some people saying, you know what, I voted for Trump, but I didn't think it would look like this. You know what, I thought I wanted mass deportations, but I didn't want to see, this crying woman getting sent back to like El Salvador or Nicaragua or something like that. You didn't want that. And so a lot of people are saying, I thought I wanted it, but I didn't realize what it would look like. And Democrats are throwing their money in on this idea that people are becoming disenfranchised with the policy in practice. And that's a big gamble because polling has shown otherwise previously. Polling has shown Republicans and Democrats, you could say overwhelmingly among Republicans, but more so than less of Democrats, support not only deportations, but mass deportations. This is technically a big tent issue. And you could also point back to Bill Clinton and even the first term of Barack Obama, when this was also a Democrat policy. Democrats also used to be very strong on deportations. This was a big tent issue, so we'll see if it works out. Now, on the Democrat side, the big rallying call is this woman who was shot by a federal agent who was trying to run the agent over with their car. They want her to be the new George Floyd, basically. And on the other side of the argument, the Trump side, they're talking about mass fraud, criminals, rapists, DUIs, murderers, gang members, and pointing to people who've been raped, murdered, killed, run over by illegal immigrants. Now, on the side of the protests, again, the key topics can be potential violence, but on the Republican side also, the Somalis and the fact that illegal immigrants are defrauding Americans, stealing welfare, stealing Medicare, and committing they're saying now potentially 10% of the entire federal government spending is being stolen by fraud. And a lot of that is from illegal immigrants. I'll be talking more about this and where this could lead after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. Anti-ICE protests are ramping up, spreading all across the country, and a key topic is going to be potential violence, attacks on officers, and mass fraud, depending on which side of the aisle you're on. Now, Town Hall said this: anti-ICE activists have begun distributing tire deflating devices and instructions to their fellow agitators in Minneapolis in hopes of hindering immigration and enforcement operations in the city, a local politician revealed. It notes the devices are 3D printed tire drainers, and it says they were distributed in a neighborhood near the University of Minnesota with attached instructions and a link to the design file. In other words, encouraging people to print these out and do it. It says the package recovered by Jerry Munson, the former state representative, held 5 such devices. And along with that also, by the way, there are plenty of people who go out and decide to protest or riot on their very own, right? You're watching the TV and the TV tells you Orange Man bad, and you're like, Orange Man bad! And you go out there and you have to go deflate some tires or throw some rocks at police cars, and then you go to jail probably. But there are also organizations often pulling the strings. There is very large-scale organization. Not all of it is grassroots. And to be fair, I like to joke, but to be fair, I've gone to the anti-ICE protests before, witnessed a lot of it, actually recorded some of them burning cars and so on. You have a lot of agitators. You also have plenty of people who legitimately believe in it. There is legitimate grassroots, hey, I wanted to go out because I care about this issue support. But there's also a very organized, very nefarious element to this. And I know this from previous protests. I've been covering these things, since, again, I've been a journalist for almost 20 years, right? A long time now. I can tell you the BLM riots, they used to have on their billboards the names of the organizations. You had different communist and socialist organizations, and they used to just have it on their billboards. They used to not hide it. You actually have a lot of the same organizations that jump from issue to issue. And what they do is this. They have a tier list of organizations, funding structures. The Tides Foundation is one of the big ones, for example. They pour money into other NGOs, nonprofits, and these nonprofits will focus on different things. The Latino issue, the Black equity issue, the homosexual agenda, so on, right? And that's the actual name for it, right? So on. Affordability issue. And so they'll create different issue organizations. These go to college campuses, get students riled up. These go to different immigration groups. They do community organizing, get them riled up. And they manufacture a grassroots. Then beneath these, you have another tier, which are the violent agitators. And that's where you have the Antifa factions. That's where you have different groups like that, which do get money, not directly, but indirectly through the entire chain. It's like a giant octopus. And at the center of it, you have what are regarded as legitimate organizations. And at the very end of the tentacles, you have sometimes really violent organizations, some that are actually designated as terrorists, Antifa, for example, in some regards, some that engage in attacks on officers, some that advocate for it. And then also on the periphery of that, radicals, agitators who go between the two. They're not part of, maybe they're members of this group, but they're also members of a group, and they can carry over the funding, paying their paychecks with this one, while being part of another group organizing who still get their paychecks from here, but want to split off into a more violent faction. And what they'll do is they'll latch themselves onto the protests. So when this group holds a protest, the one in the periphery, even though they might hold 2 different titles, they might be a member of this group, but they do the violent agitation through this, they will go to those same rallies and they'll be the ones deflating tires. They'll be the ones throwing rocks at cars. They'll be the ones burning vehicles. When me and my team were in Los Angeles reporting on the LA riots, the anti-ICE riots, and remember when it was a big controversy, Trump was sending the National Guard there? We actually witnessed several burnings of cars and also personally witnessed one of the agitators who had a large radio system stuffed into a backpack. We actually witnessed that they were organizing location to location, and that shortly after organizing, looking at a location, talking on a radio, Like, he was in his backpack and he was like this, he had a thing here. Soon after, somebody set a car on fire at that exact location. It does seem to be there is a lot of weird organization taking place. And guess what? President Donald Trump is saying he's going to uncover what these organizations are. They want to find out who these people are, what's going on. Let me show you. This is during a press gaggle aboard Air Force One on Sunday. Watch.
It was highly disrespectful of law enforcement. The woman and her friend were highly disrespectful of law enforcement. You saw that. They were harassing them, were following for days and for hours. And I think, frankly, they're professional agitators.
But just disrespect.
And I'd like to find out, and we are going to find out who's paying for it.
But just disrespect.
With their brand new signs and all the different things. But these are professional agitators, and law enforcement should not be in a position where they have to put up with this stuff. What that woman and what her friend and what their other friends were doing to law enforcement, not just ICE, law enforcement is outrageous.
Now, again, in the United States, like it or not, our political system, at least the election and get out the vote drives, tend to work on outrage. They work on outrage. We have two sides right now. The Republicans have the MAGA rallies, right? Trump goes out and does the MAGA rallies. You can believe what you like about those. A lot of it is kind of, rallying his base. We're going to do this and we're going to do that, and here's our victories. On the Democrat side, it's mostly outrage. We hate Trump. We hate that he does this. We're going to stop him from doing this. And that's the issue, right? That's how the media system works in America. On the Democrat side, more so too, you're not talking about a bunch of people going to a stadium and listening to a guy speak. They're going on the streets and they're protesting. And latched onto that are a lot of violent agitators. And why is that? It's because that's what gets the cameras. That's what gets the cameras rolling. That's what gets people talking about it. That's what makes it a bigger issue. And what I call the media industrial complex, a lot of journalists are political actors. They're not, I don't know. Everyone has their opinion. It's fine. I don't think you're not a journalist if you have a political issue. But I would say a lot of these people are actively using their roles as journalists to effectively trying to push the vote in one way or another. A lot of them are activists. I'd say most of the media right now is activist journalism. And so you have this entire nexus tied in with corporations. About 90% of the media in the United States is controlled by 5 or 6 mega corporations. These large-scale corporations have their issues. They place a lot of demands on the journalists. A lot of journalists do not have really free say over everything they do. Tied in with that is a whole nexus of NGOs, political operatives, issue-driven places, protest for hire type organizations. They do exist. There are a lot in Washington, for example. And other things like that are part of the kind of issue machine. And that issue machine pumps its blood, and that is what drives forward these large-scale movements. When you watch these big protests get organized, you're very rarely watching something that is completely natural. You're watching a political campaign disguised as a grassroots movement. This is a political campaign, right? Now, on that point also, the big scandal in American politics in recent years was that, Arctic frost, right? Arctic frost was targeting Trump and his team. Legal investigations, criminal charges. And guess what? Those investigations into Trump and those around him are now themselves turning into a very large-scale scandal. Just the News said this: an FBI supervisor who openly opposed Donald Trump on social media played a crucial role in igniting the controversial Arctic frost probe, pressing to add the former president as a formal suspect of the investigations and circulating articles from liberal activists and left-wing news sources to make his case, according to evidence recently turned over to Congress and obtained by Just the News. And he also circulated by email clippings from such anti-Trump outlets as Just Security, NPR, The Washington Post, pushing for a criminal probe of Trump related to the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot, the memos show. Now, briefly on this, right? I've mentioned different strategies. There's also one that you could frame as the above and below strategy. And there are, in fact, some political actors who do this knowingly and intentionally. And how does it work? If you're a wealthy billionaire, if you're a billionaire and you want to puppeteer an election, if you want to puppeteer a nation, what do? Well, you have to get influence at 2 to 3 levels. So what are the 2 to 3 levels? You need to influence politicians, meaning you back their campaigns, meaning you fund them on issues, meaning you lobby them. And you have a lot of people who do this. So you are the money behind the campaigns. Then you have to be the money behind the media. You buy media, you fund media, you massively invest in media to the extent that you need a say on what they cover and what they don't cover. And then you need to fund the organizations that do the get out the vote rallies, right? The protest organizations, the grassroots organizations, the get out the vote people, those ones. And then when you control or influence all 3 of these, you can puppeteer movements. You can work as a puppeteer. And what they do is this. They will have the grassroots carry out a protest. I'm going to, like, say you're a billionaire and you want to alter American politics. What do? You pour money into these NGOs or nonprofits, or you just start one. Or you create an organization that basically starts these things, right? There are a lot of them in this country. You start an organization that begins all these grassroots movements. And what do you want to do? You want to have maybe a defund the police one. You want to have Black Lives Matter. You want to have the Latino or Latinx movement. You want to have the anti-ICE riots, for example, right? Just hypothetically speaking. You make people go out and riot. And then what do? You choose your community leaders and your organizers. Those organizers become the voices of the movement. You have your 12-year-old girl who becomes the face of a movement. You have your, politician standing at the front with the megaphone, putting on the show. You want your voices of a political campaign. Those voices then, you make the media the ones you also influence because you're an investor or you're funding them. Sometimes a lot of these people even buy media. You have them go and cover it. You have them give favorable coverage for it, push it, frame it, and so on. The media often lies. Shocker, right? The media often lies. And I can tell you someone who's been targeted by a lot of these fake campaigns. When it happens to you, you see even more clearly how they lie. They lie through their teeth. They lie like a bunch of scheming weasels. It's crazy when you see how bad they lie. And what they do oftentimes is they only interview one source. They take information out of context. They hide evidence. They present a partial picture. Sometimes they squeeze the actual evidence to the bottom of the article. Sometimes they make false statements in the beginning of the article or in the headline. Or they make narratives or angles that are not representative based on the evidence in order to frame narratives. And then what happens when you can frame a false narrative is you get the other media to pick it up. So the false narrative, even though it did not stand on the basis of evidence, becomes the story. This woman was not trying to run over the officer at the time she was shot. This individual was not overdosing on fentanyl at the time of his death. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. And they lie about it. X number of officers were killed on January 6th. No officers were killed that day. It's an actual lie. They're lying to you about it. There were not a single one. Not a single one. It's all lies. They lied to you. They make these false narratives, right? And then the media repeats it because that's the media machine. And then what happens when you have the media machine is you then have the politician or the local official or whoever's campaign you backed. You make it, hey, this is what I care about. This is the issue. You make them respond to it. When they respond to it, the media picks up again. The media writes articles about it. That becomes the national issue. And then that feeds also into the riots and the protests, which then start getting actual grassroots movement. When you start to have that, that's when a protest of 20 people turns into a protest of 10,000 people. Because then it's in the public eye. Then you start getting the random people coming out. And when you have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people, that's when you can turn it violent. That's when you can have your rioters, your professionals come in And they bus around, go place to place. I know this because I talk to officers and it's not even secret anymore. They'll go place to place, and they're the ones burning buildings. They're the ones starting the looting. They're the ones throwing the bricks. They're the ones dropping off the pallets of rocks. They're those ones, right? And what it means is they want to make it look like Americans are outraged, and the media feeds that, and the politicians eat it up, and before you know it, you have an issue, a national issue that challenges the legitimacy of a policy or a program or a cultural element or something else in the country. And the wealthy billionaire funding this whole thing, puppeteering it, laughs in Hungarian, ha ha ha, like that, right? But back to the point, right? Back to the point. This is very common, unfortunately. This is also how you do color revolutions. This is how you do color revolutions. It's unfortunately very easy to do, and unfortunately it is very common. But back to the article, let me show you this. It notes that this individual tied in with these criminal investigations, right? Basically, the Arctic frost investigations, what was happening? They were being fed by fake articles written by activist news outlets and activist journalists. The activist journalists lie to you, make false articles, take things out of context, give half-truths, or just extremely biased reporting. And then not only does it get picked up politically by this whole machine I just talked about, it also gets picked up by people who are politically, motivated within the justice system, and they act on it. Now, I don't know if that's the case here, but that seems to be why there is concern, because it says, when this individual's colleagues originally drafted the investigation's launch, against targeting Trump, remember, and his allies. It notes that the document to focus on the Trump campaign and affiliated and still unknown subjects, it notes that add DJT, add Donald J. Trump, we assume, was scribbled onto the draft memo, indicating that maybe Trump was not a party to these investigations until an individual within the justice system basically used a lot of biased media to believe that the media was true, and then using these false reports, then launched a criminal investigation based on these types of reports. Now notes this. Emails indicate this individual is pushing to add Trump to the investigative launch document. Interesting, right? Now further, it says this. An unearthed email from April 2022 showed that this individual approving the opening of Arctic Frost being the name of the actual movement and investigation and special counsel and everything else to remove the, Trump, to go after Trump after he left office, and launched at a time when it would make him, when he was trying to launch his re-election campaign, undermining the, voting process. It notes the former FBI official did not immediately respond to a request for comment sent to him by Just the News through lawyers who previously represented him. Now, back to Arctic Frost, so this is why it's such a big deal. If you have an individual who is pushing to add DJT, add, we assume, Donald J. Trump to this investigation, that's a big deal. Also keep in mind the special counsel was appointed through pseudo-legal means. He was not technically eligible for being appointed, many would argue. Also, agents within the FBI had noted, based on now revealed documents, that they did not believe they had probable cause to raid Mar-a-Lago. The order was given to do it anyway. Also, the order was done through a grand jury in Washington, D.C., rather than in Florida, where the operation took place. Another thing that was questionably legal. And not to mention, they were paying for some of their, witnesses, which is questionably ethical. You could say it's probably legal, but questionably ethical. And other things showing inherent bias within the movements and so on. All of this is turning into a broad scandal. And the way the Trump team is now looking at this, the Trump administration, is they're looking at Arctic Frost tied in with Crossfire Hurricane, tied in with Russiagate, tied in with the entire campaign spanning the last 10 years. They're viewing the attacks on Trump, the spying on Mar-a-Lago, the false framing of the Trump-Russia narrative, basically that entire thing, the claims that the Hunter Biden laptop was illegitimate. Turns out that it was legitimate. the many former intel officers that came out and said that was illegitimate, but then claimed that the Russia stuff against Trump was legitimate, which it was not. Many of them actually knew it because they were actually part of the process of forming the scandal, knowing it was paid opposition research from unvetted sources. Going into, again, the framing of Trump and the entire Arctic frost investigations, most of which was based on novel interpretations of law and possibly illegal means to have even obtained, search warrants. All of this is being framed as a type of large-scale conspiracy. And I don't mean conspiracy like, tinfoil hat conspiracy. I mean conspiracy as in RICO, as in a racketeering type thing, where people worked in cahoots with each other to commit a crime. That's the way the Trump administration is looking at this. Effectively a palace coup and an operation to seize from the American people the ability to choose who you want to be your president through an election process. That's the way it's being framed by the Trump team. Now, agree with that or not, that's the new narrative, okay? That's the way they're framing it. And look, also, remember, keep in mind, the backdrop of a lot of all the stuff, right, Arctic frost and so on, was Donald Trump's challenges to the 2020 elections. Trump was saying they stole the election from us. And they had to stop the steal rallies, and he told people on January 6th, they had a scheduled speaking event at the Capitol building. What was supposed to happen on January 6th? What did Trump want? Republican members of Congress were supposed to read every allegation of election fraud. That was actually stopped because of the pipe bombs. And then, of course, the agitators who went to the Capitol building tore down the no trespassing signs, tore down the bike racks, and entered the building, including waving at the camera so the electronic doors opened for them, right? Interesting, right? While Trump was still speaking at the ellipse. And of course, that whole thing is what prevented the public reading of allegations of election fraud. Many people would say, well, the courts looked at it, there was nothing there. The courts never actually looked at the evidence. The courts never looked at the evidence. The few times they had actually was shown to be legitimate. But on that front also, President Trump is working to change how elections are being conducted for the midterms. And some are suggesting this is another scandal because how dare Trump mess with the election systems ahead of a major election? Let me show you what Trump's actually doing, okay? This is the Washington Post. And a few of the things they're noting, they note that Trump pressed GOP leaders in several states to take the unusual step of redrawing their congressional maps for partisan gain in the middle of a decade. Ordinarily, states redraw their maps once every 10 years after the census is completed. Look, Democrats redraw their maps all the time, and based on voting dynamics, the reality is there is a racial discrepancy on who is more likely to vote for what. Democrats have largely prevented redrawing of voting maps because, let's be honest, a lot of Trump supporters tend to be white males. And if you're talking about some demographics, especially like black communities, they tend to vote like 80% Democrat, right? And so they say that when Republicans try to redraw the maps that it's racist. And so a lot of that actually gets stopped. A lot of it has recently been stopped. And the irony behind the Republicans trying to redraw congressional maps, it's actually kind of backfired. You've actually seen a lot of that get blocked, and the Democrats have been able to largely redraw the maps more so in their favor. But it says also, Trump for years has railed against mail voting, they mean vote by mail, leading many of his supporters to question electoral outcomes, even though academic studies and courts have found that widespread ballot fraud is rare. Now, what's the basis of saying widespread ballot fraud is rare? Well, a few random studies and criminal charges. And they just go by, well, this number of people were charged. If a tree falls in the woods, does it make any sound? If a crime is never investigated, is it still a crime? You tell me. And if you block a crime from being investigated, is it still a crime? Good question, right? Or for that matter, if you're 23 U.S. states and you stop the federal government from investigating a crime, is it still a crime? Let's be fair, right? And so we'll have to see. On the point, the reason why universal mail-in ballots used to not be a thing, basically it was only allowed for military in a few very rare circumstances, was because it can be used to rig elections. But they're saying that not enough cases have been prosecuted to justify what Trump is doing. It notes as well, Trump's March executive order sought to establish new standards for voting equipment, but no machines meeting these qualifications are commercially available. Technically, like no connection to the internet. I'll leave it at that, okay? Trump has basically put standards in place for some of the voting machines that would tighten regulations around it. They're noting that no machines exist that would have those qualifications, and so I would question, if no machines exist that have those qualifications, then how would this qualify as anything that would interfere with election? They have nothing to worry about, right? We'll have to wait and see. It notes also the Justice Department is seeking the list of registered voters from the last at least 40 states, and in many cases has taken the rare step of asking that the rolls include personal information, such as voters' dates of birth and partial social security numbers. Why would they do that? Well, it's because if you have that information, you can see if a social security number has been used multiple times to vote. One thing Elon Musk has stated based on when he was doing his investigations when he was the head of the Doge department, is he found that you could actually use a single social security number to basically get unlimited number of different types of fraud. And if you had people registering to vote in multiple states, using stolen social security numbers for multiple things, registering them, no voter ID, nothing to check it, they can actually cross-examine this and find whether people were committing fraud, basically. The article here is not stating everything either. One of the big things the Trump team is doing is they're looking at, for example, social security numbers, citizenship databases, and voter enrollment. And it notes that 10 states have provided their complete voter files or told the Justice Department that they intend to, according to the administration. Now, question here, if at least 40 states have been asked to give us information and 10 states have done it, what number is remaining of states that are refusing to cooperate? The answer, according to the Sesame Street Dracula, is 30, my friends. 30 states are not cooperating on this. Why might they not be cooperating? You tell me. It notes the Justice Department has sued for records in 23 states and Washington, D.C. And so they're trying to get the records, and lo and behold, these are divided along party lines, I should note, of the states refusing to cooperate in providing information that would show you if illegal immigrants were in fact voting in this country. It notes also the president has appointed people who promote the lie that he won the 2020 election to some of the nation's most powerful federal law enforcement positions, and his administration includes people who continue to echo Trump's false claim that Democrats stole the 2020 election from him, meaning that Trump basically is appointing people who support him. How dare he? It notes also Trump has stepped up ICE patrols across the country and deployed or attempted to deploy National Guard troops in several cities run by Democrats. Why would he do that? Well, he's deporting people and he's deployed National Guard to protect federal agents, federal buildings, because they're being attacked. You could argue, on the Democrat side, they're saying it works as like intimidation. I might be too afraid to vote if I see the National Guard. We have the National Guard in New York at the subway stations. It's not Trump doing it, it's the city. It does not affect people's willingness to vote. But you could argue that being afraid to go out to vote because you're afraid of your car being burned or getting death threats or rocks thrown at it or people blocking the freeway might stop you from voting. And so while they're starting mass movements and protests and riots, the question is, well, who's responsible? The chicken, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Was it the protest or the response to the protest that's causing the problems? You tell me. And it's also that Trump suggested in August that he plans to conduct a census years ahead of schedule that would exclude people present in the country illegally. Now, on the census, this will probably not be done in time to affect the midterm elections. It might be, but it might not. And so what's the problem with this? Well, remember what happened before the Biden elections, right? Before, when Biden was president. They actually had a redoing of the census, and they counted non-citizens and illegal immigrants. And the problem with that is, based on data we know, under Biden alone, they imported about 20 million people. If you import about 20 million people and you send 20 million people all across the country, paying for their flights, busing them, giving them free housing, giving them free hotels, like in New York, it's even required by law, free food and so on, and you're putting them into a few key areas. Well, what are the poor areas and what are the voting dynamics of, let's say, areas where you'd very likely find illegal immigrant housing? They tend to be areas that vote more Democrat, right? But you can also do it strategically. We're sending like swing counties, swing states, and so on. Now, what happens when you seed an area with, let's say, 1,000, 10,000, 20,000, 500,000 new people, or if it's New York, 1,000 people every day, which, remember, the numbers were incredibly high. What happens? Well, when you have the census go through and they count everybody, the census determines how much federal money you get. It also determines how many House seats you get. How much federal representation do you get? And if you send these people to New York City or California or other places, and you bolster the population by 20 million or 30 million or 40 million, some say illegal immigrants are about 40 million, not to mention non-citizens, not to mention visa holders and so on, all of them are counted on the census. What does that mean? It means you bolster the population mostly of cities, because that's where the visa holders would often be, and you've bolstered the numbers of people in the more poor communities, which is where the subsidized housing would be. And that means you get more political representation and more money, meaning you artificially gerrymander federal representation and you change the dynamic of who gets the House seats and who doesn't. You actually alter the political makeup of the country by doing this. And people can say whatever they want about illegal immigrants voting. The census and the fact that illegal immigrants are counted on the census has utterly altered political representation and congressional representation. And that's why it matters so much. Now, it is unconventional that Trump would be redoing the census right ahead of all this. Again, because of legal challenges, he will probably, at least in my take, not get it done before the midterm elections. But this will have a big impact. Some estimates say that if Trump were to redo the census, not counting non-citizens, including illegal immigrants, Democrats could lose anywhere around the areas of like 25, 30 House seats, which would massively disrupt the political makeup in the country. That would actually change, effectively, political representation. It would give Republicans a pretty unbreakable majority, but also it would force Democrats to take a more moderate stance, because they would need to compete for the more, they would need to compete for the moderates more. It would actually change the political makeup of this country if Democrats lost that number of seats. They would have to go a little closer to Republicans on the spectrum, which is why it's such a big deal. All right, that said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. So let's see here. All right, I went long today. So let's see. TM Master Chief, you're saying, these protests are not working like they did during President Trump's first term. I'd actually agree with you. I would actually say that if they can get 40,000 people in a single location, if you were to ask me, because I know how these dynamics work, right? You can get, okay, let's say you have disenfranchised federal workers, if it's in Washington. You have unions, you have the grassroots machine. I'm talking like Freedom Road Socialists, Democratic Socialists of America. With those alone, you're going to hit the threshold of like 10 to 15,000 probably. If you really mobilize them, maybe 20,000. If you then get the nexus of NGOs, nonprofits, The No Kings protests had literal hundreds of organizations involved. If you have hundreds of organizations involved, I'm talking like, NGOs, nonprofits, and so on. You just get their members, you're going to bring in another 5,000 roughly, I'd say, if you get hundreds like they did. You're up to what, 25,000 maybe? You have the media promote it. You're going to get journalists there. That's not going to count as too much, but the media promoting it is going to also get the rallying of the grassroots then. You're going to be at about, 30,000. And then you do a lot of campaigns at college campuses. You're going to have a lot of, because the local colleges will go there too, you're going to hit roughly, 35,000. I don't think it's far-fetched. But the issue is, a lot of that is organization. A lot of that is not technically grassroots. It's a machine, right? And so I would actually say that if you don't capture the average American, if you don't capture the average voter, you're not actually capturing the people you need to get out and actually do something. And to your point also, I would say it's probably not as much as Trump's first term. The pink hat people, remember those? That was a pretty big grassroots one. I think there was a lot of legitimate grassroots organization with that. The BLM riots absolutely had a lot of grassroots support. They were orchestrated, they were organized, but you had a lot of legitimate grassroots support as well. Those actually did get a lot of people out. And I think a lot of people actually got disenfranchised with many of those things. The other side is, a lot of Democrats are not like Antifa. A lot of them are not that extreme. And so when they see people deflating tires and burning cars and looting buildings, a lot of the moderate types are going to be a little wary about associating with that too. And so you might get the students, they're probably going to care a lot less, but a lot of the moderate types are going to not want to associate with it. I would also say something about the No Kings riots. If you looked at those riots, what did you see? This sounds funny, but hear me out. It was a lot of old white people, okay? It was a lot of old white people. And to the point where a lot of the college students were being like, we need young people. Where are the young people at? Why is it a lot of old white people? I don't know. That's a good question. Your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it's some of the organizations. Maybe it's just people a lot of time on their hands. But a lot of it was that. But I would say you did not get kind of the bread and butter of like political organization going. I don't think they're actually managing to capture the people they want to. And also, especially with the anti-ICE riots, you're going to have a lot of non-citizens and illegal immigrants. And you might get a lot of them out there. That's not a voting bloc. At least as far as we're told, okay? That's not a voting bloc. Athena Leons, you're saying, the book Unmasked by Andy No, I read that. It's actually a really good book. Explains their rally procedures, their doctrine, the mandated reading materials, their clinics, and how they monitor and erase their internet information. Yeah, so Andy No wrote a book called Unmasked, where he unmasks Antifa. If you didn't see my documentary on Charlie Kirk, that's Truth Under Fire, The Framing of Charlie Kirk. You can watch it on Epic TV. I interview Andy No on there. I read his book prior to the interview. He's a great guy. And yeah, absolutely, you do have a lot of, some people would say Antifa is an idea. It's not a movement. It's a movement. They have training, they have facilities, they have booklets, they have everything. Funding, they have everything. But the thing is, they have a lot of different Antifa affiliates. There's Trans-Tifa, there's weird gun clubs, the John Brown Gun Club. There's a lot of weird stuff. You get furry Antifas, okay? Maybe I don't know, they all are. And then you have the kind of old school Antifa, which is ironically less violent than the newer ones, okay? Just explaining how far these people have gone. And so you have an entire nexus there that do, as you note, cover things up, hide their tracks, and have a lot of programs for training and secrecy. Yudi Yakim, I said your name right finally. You're saying nobody has a vested short-term interest in challenging their ideologies. It's a long-term thing. If you're wrong about your views, your whole perception falls apart. People are unconsciously oriented away from challenging their paradigm. That's why brainwashing is so dangerous. To heal from it, you need immense courage and emotional resilience, and it will work on you if you get emotionally invested. It will work if you get emotionally invested. E.g., for example, people joining Scientology or other sects to expose them actually getting stuck. So let me explain a bit of that. So it is true, actually, a person's worldview is kind of the foundation of their thinking and their value system. And when you eliminate a person's worldview, their value system, sometimes their peers, the people they hang out with, their friends, the media they watch, their worldview, all of it risks crumbling down. If you pull out the foundation, it all falls down, and a person will feel wrecked. A lot of people believe things more out of emotion than they do out of logic. And that's a weird reality to talk about, but it's actually really true. Belief, and I think faith is a good thing, but belief is oftentimes based on, you're willing to believe something that's not necessarily absolutely provable, right? You go on a limb to believe things sometimes. It's not just with, your personal beliefs, but also with like your political beliefs. You sometimes go on a limb. You want to believe someone because you associate with the values, you associate with the ideas, and you associate with maybe the group, right? It's not easy to change a person's worldview. Once it's been formed, it's almost impossible to change. For example, if you're raising a child, they say that, in terms of religion, what you believe around the time that you're like 12 to 14 years old is going to be relatively what you believe for the rest of your life. So if you have a kid and you've instilled them with your religious values and they hit 12 to 14 and they're very for it, there's a good chance they're going to stick with it for the rest of life, or they're going to veer off and then come back to it, because that's like their foundation, right? You need to build a good foundation. The problem in the world these days, though, is there's a lot of false information. There's a lot of media lying to people. There's a lot of crazy stuff that kids get off the internet. And all these things are influencing them in different ways. When a person's worldview is founded on a false premise, a false media narrative, they've been lied to. When they see it, when they recognize it, it's a very painful process. It's like their world is crumbling down. It is a very painful thing for them. And a lot of people underwent that, I think. I think that you go through the stages of grief. I'll talk briefly because you mentioned brainwashing. There's a book called Rape of the Mind. I believe it's by Merlot, correct? If I'm not mistaken. It's a very interesting book. One thing it talks about is the way that political prisoners, or POWs, right, prisoners of war, were brainwashed in the Korean War. So you have American troop captured by North Korea, and it was China. We were fighting against the Chinese Communist Party. So when the Chinese Communist Party was brainwashing them, what did they do? They don't immediately make you try to cast out your entire worldview. They'll make you do a little bit at a time. A little bit at a time. Can you acknowledge that America is not perfect? Right? Okay, that's not saying they're wrong about everything. They're just not perfect. Okay, fair enough. We're not perfect. What is not perfect? Let's dig into it. And then they start digging into imperfections. Now, a lot of this works on exaggerations. You exaggerate the imperfections, and then you do minimization of the counter arguments. So China, for example, I remember I've debated with like Chinese agents before, because I used to run into them in New York all the time, especially when I was investigating them. When I was investigating the United Front, I remember you'd talk to them, and you'd be like, "Well, what about Tibet and the persecution of Tibetans?" And they'd be like, "Well, what about Iraq? Americans have invaded and occupied Iraq. Is the Chinese occupation of Tibet any different from Iraq?" Well, yeah, we're not massacring them, destroying their culture, and killing them just for being who they are. We're killing terrorists. and people who engage in violence. We're not destroying their temples and burning them down and outlawing their religion. We didn't go that far, right? We outlawed the violent elements of it, but that's about it. So, you have different arguments with it. And also, what was the basis? Well, true or false, the WMDs. I don't know. I kind of disagreed with that one on some fronts because I don't think that was real. Whereas the Tibetans, it was literally Mao Zedong and Stalin talking, and they wanted to just capture that part of the country. Mao Zedong admitted in his own letters that they did not own Tibet. So it was about a lot of false arguments, and a lot of it was about cultural genocide and the destruction of a religion. Not to mention the mass enslavement and the cultural genocide carried out there. If they talk about Taiwan, China says, well, what about Hawaii? I actually debated this. I had a really funny debate one time. I was speaking at, I was one of two debaters at a financial club, and they brought me in to debate China and the threat of China or lack thereof. And I was debating with a woman who I knew was a Chinese agent, right? So she's like, well, I'm talking about, see, this was like years ago before it looked like they're going to invade Taiwan. I was like, well, they claim ownership over Taiwan. They're going to invade it. Taiwan's its own country in every right. They have their own government, their own laws, totally separate legal system. They're a democratic country. China's a communist country. They do have the one country, two systems that only changed not too long ago, actually. It was the Carter administration that changed it. America used to recognize Taiwan as the true government in exile of China, and the Chinese Communist Party is the illegitimate government. That was the basis of the One China, Two Systems policy. Or sorry, not the One China, Two Systems. The One China policy, right? And she came out. She said, "What about Hawaii? America took Hawaii." And Hawaiians want to be free, like China, like Taiwan wants to be conquered. And I was like, literally, well, like as a native Hawaiian, we don't see it that way. She's like, yes, they do. It was actually really funny. She kind of like freaked out and lost face. I actually can say there are some communist groups in Hawaii who believe that, but it's not the majority of the population. But on that front, it's a false equivalent. You're talking about it was a banana company that overthrew the Hawaiian government. You could say that was not very nice, and Hawaiians, I think, are the only native group not treated like Native Americans. Probably for the best. I don't think getting free money is good for people. I think it kind of makes you lazy, to be honest, and it makes you not do things, and that's the last thing we need, okay? Frankly. But to that point, of course, it's not like America's threatening to like militarily invade and conquer and like genocide them, like the CCP is threatening to do to like the Taiwanese system. It's quite different, right? And so it's a false equivalent. But to that point, this is what they do. They create a lot of false equivalents. They eliminate a lot of narratives, and they don't show you the whole picture. So while they would point, and the counterpoint to this too, is while they would point to these maybe more divisive issues. All of us could acknowledge, okay, Iraq, Tibet, okay, maybe Hawaii, Taiwan, maybe not so much, but okay, some people could believe it, right? You need to show the whole picture. So to the Tibetan issue, like, look, they're not just killing Tibetans. The Chinese Communist Party killed, 50 to 70 million Chinese under Mao Zedong alone? 50 to 70 million people. They killed, multiples more than the Nazis killed. This is probably documented the most murderous regime in human history, killing its own people, starving them to death, massacring them. The Cultural Revolution, that was every one of them should have Nuremberg trials. And they've continued doing it. They have live organ harvesting of political dissidents. What kind of a sick freak could acknowledge that that's not even at least bad? Like, how could you not even say, okay, that's kind of evil? Taking the corneas out of the eyes of children while they're still alive because their parents believe in a religion you don't like. Is that justified? Has America done anything like that? No. Heck no. I don't think any regime has ever done anything like that, at least that we know of, at least not on a large scale. re-education through labor, slave labor, torture. Like you're talking like Inquisition level torture methods. A lot of the people targeted through this right now are Falun Gong practitioners, Falun Dafa. You also have a lot of other religious groups targeted. House Christians are starting to get targeted a lot more. Muslim Uyghurs also targeted quite a bit now as well. And again, if you want to talk about the broader picture of this, yeah, the crimes committed by the CCP exceed far greater than just Tibet. And so you need to talk about the whole picture. So brainwashing techniques oftentimes work on partial images, exaggerations, targeted minimization, right? And other methods of information manipulation. And the irony you have is, frankly, a lot of the media these days does the exact same thing. A lot of the way the media lie is the exact same way these days. Half-truths, false narratives built upon true information. So the narrative is often wrong, but they'll build it on the basis of what looks like true information. Again, just reporting false things, interviews that prove to be false. Sometimes they'll hide the falsehood within research, and they have the research paper come to a false conclusion, and they'll cite the research. It's one of the ways classical disinformation works. And they do stuff like that. It's the same way political manipulation, propaganda, and brainwashing works. I would actually argue a lot of mainstream media uses brainwashing tactics the same way that North Korea was doing against American POWs. It's very similar stuff. On that note, if anyone wants to read about that, 2 books I recommend reading. Read Rape of the Mind by Merlot and read Propaganda by Bernays. And you'll have a very clear understanding of how these operations work. And that said, thank you all for being here. Happy Hump Day. We're on Wednesday. And I will see you again tomorrow. So join me again, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And as always, thank you so much. Please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.